Okay, we're going to be in John chapter 9. We're talking about the second occurrence of the Jesus claim, I am the light of the world. He says it early in chapter 8, and then he says it again here in chapter 9 as he heals a man who was born blind. So, as the story unfolds, yes, the man is given sight. A man who's never seen before is given sight. But this is really more about the man's spiritual sight than it is about his physical sight. And it's also contrasting his sight, his faith, with the blindness and the unbelief of the Jews, sometimes called Jews, sometimes called Pharisees in John chapter 9. So we have kind of the layout of John chapter 9. You have a miracle story, just a simple miracle story, similar to what you would see elsewhere in John, very similar to what you'd see in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But then there's a kind of an expansion of the story, the aftermath of the story, and that goes on for many, many verses, and that's different than many of the stories that you have, many of the miracle stories that you have in the Gospels. You have lots of conversations, not just conversing with Jesus, but conversing the onlookers and the neighbors and the Pharisees, conversing with the man who is healed. You've got more of that going on than you do have conversing with Jesus. The first part of the expansion, you have the miracle story itself, and then you have Jesus and his disciples and the blind man. And then the second part, you have the blind man and the neighbors. Then you have the blind man and the Pharisees. Then you have the Pharisees and the blind man's parents. Then you have the Pharisees and the blind man. Then Jesus and the blind man. And the story ends with Jesus and the Pharisees. So all these little couplings who are conversing basically about Jesus and the healing occur throughout this chapter. So really one event, the healing, and then the aftermath and the conversations about the healing make up John chapter 9, where we have this second I am the light of the world statement. This unfolds like a courtroom drama. There's this blind man and this blind man's parents and Jesus himself are being interrogated. And it feels very much like a courtroom, like a trial scene. In fact, many recognize a literary linkage or literary similarity with Jesus' interrogation at his trial before Pilate in chapter 18. So a lot of the kind of twists and turns and irony and all that kind of stuff feels very familiar by the time you get to John chapter 18, when Jesus is standing before Pilate. I wonder what that's all about. Could it be that as John is writing this, certainly he's reporting the history, but at the same time he's very sensitive to and aware of the dynamics of his audience 60 years after the events that he's reporting. So if he's writing around the reign of Domitian and Christians are being persecuted perhaps by the Roman government, but also ostracized and persecuted by Jews, then showing the challenge that the blind man is standing up to and refuses to be intimidated and continues to tell the truth and testify to the deeds and the identity of Jesus, regardless of intimidation. would be inspiring to people who are reading this in and around 90 AD, if that's when it was actually first read. That you, if you can stand up to the interrogation, are like Jesus, who stands up to the interrogation of Pilate. And then you've got sort of a weak testimony and a cowardice that we'll see in the parents who are also being interrogated. Keep in mind that in 90 AD it would be a very grievous and controversial thing for somebody, if you're a Jew, for somebody in your family to become a follower of Jesus. And so you're going to see in 90 AD, if you're a Jew and one of your children, adult children even, becomes a follower of Jesus, you might distance yourself from that child, because that child is going to get kicked out of the synagogue and persecuted, and you don't want to be tied to him anymore, because you don't want to get kicked out of the synagogue, which is your whole way of life, the center of your life, and you don't want to be persecuted by the authorities. So you're going to see that happening here, and you're going to see a kind of a distancing that happens with the parents of this blind man. Let's go ahead and just read a little bit, and then we'll talk about it. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes, and then he told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked. He said, "I don't know." Well, the story goes on, and there's a lot more to chapter 9 than what we just read. But let's just, before we take in too much, let's just talk about this opening scene. So you have the miracle story, and then the neighbors talking with the blind man about what happened to him, talking with each other as well. Let's start with the opening conundrum. As they went along, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples, I don't know if they're just wanting to talk about philosophy, or if this was just a sort of an academic curiosity, or if they're feeling compassion towards this man, or if they're wanting to sort of answer a global, universal question here. But it seems inappropriate now to ask this kind of a question. It's very, very much not within modern sensibilities to use a person who is disabled and propose that there's some moral sin behind it. But that wasn't the case in these days, and it was fair game for such a question. Somebody must have sinned that this man was born blind. Did the man sin, or is he paying for the sins of his parents? Now, we have Like in Exodus 20, even in one of the commandments, you have this idea that God will punish those even to the third and fourth generation. So you have within the Jewish mindset that God is going to punish not just an individual for his or her sins, but is going to punish down through the generations for the sins of the parents. And so it could be that this is what the disciples have in mind. Also, there's a theme. It's not the only theme, but there's a theme in the Old Testament that if you obey my commands, you'll be blessed. If you disobey my commands, you'll be cursed. So here, this man has lived this cursed life in darkness. Is it because he's a sinner, or is it maybe somebody from his past, his ancestors, and he's paying for it? So they asked Jesus this question. Here's Jesus' answer. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. Now, it's highly likely that the man was not perfect and his parents were not perfect. Jesus is not saying that this man never sinned and that his parents never sinned. What he's saying is the blindness is not a result, not a direct result of this man or this man's parents' sin. Jesus is not looking for a culprit here. Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened. So then why did it happen? We're looking for somebody to blame here. Kind of like our culture today. We want somebody to point the finger at. We want somebody to blame. And these disciples said, somebody's got to be to blame for this. And Jesus is not going to point the finger looking for someone to blame. He said, this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. This is not a glib response. He's not being evasive or dismissive. And it's not simply an intro to a miracle. You know, this happened so that you're going to see what's going to happen next. Rather, I really think he's saying this. God will overcome this man's impairment. God will overcome this man's impairment in a way and a time that is known to God. The work of God is going to be displayed in this man's life. The work of God is going to be displayed in all lives who turn to him. There is injustice, there is pain, there is suffering, but God will right all wrongs. God will alleviate the suffering. God is going to do the work that brings light and healing and life to the world. This world is full of darkness and death, but Jesus is the light and he is the resurrection. And God is doing his work through Jesus. And so Jesus' answer is this. This happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. It's reminiscent of John chapter 5, verse 17. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him. Jesus said to them, my Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. So in a Sabbath controversy, he says, his Father is at work, and I am working too. So why was this man born blind? Because you're about to see the work of God in his life. He goes on to talk about the work. Verse 4, chapter 9, verse 4. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. That's a strange activity, isn't it? He makes a little mud cake out of dirt and spit and rubs it on the man's eyes. I wonder if that makes you think of anything. Does it remind you of anything? When God formed Adam, how did he do it? He formed him from the dust, and then he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Look at the contact. Look at the the touching. Look at the dirt. Look at the breathing into his nostrils. You've got Jesus spitting and forming from the dirt and bringing life. It may not be a kind of a creational allusion here, a creational sort of motif or reference, but when the gospel starts off like this, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Anything he does ought to be suspect of having a creational motif when the gospel begins like that. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word, verse 14, became flesh, and he dwelt among us. And then Jesus says elsewhere in the gospel, I only do what I see my Father doing. So you watch this one who tabernacled, who pitched his tent among us, who dwelt with us. You watch him, and as you watch him, you're seeing God. So I don't want to, in a dogmatic way, say this is some sort of a creational motif, but he is bringing life and light to this man through his activity with the dirt and the contact with his face, his own spit. John chapter 1 verse 3 goes on, through him all things were made, without him nothing was made. Through him, the Word, who became flesh, and we know as Jesus of Nazareth, through him, Jesus, all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. Now he is showing his light to men in a very tangible, memorable way by actually giving sight to this man who lived in darkness. So, he said, go, wash in the pool of Siloam. I think that John and perhaps, and really Jesus, kind of like that the pool is, Siloam means sent. He's gonna do this activity, and then he's gonna send him. He's gonna send him to the pool that's named Sent. And so this man was sent, and there's a little play on words, and he went and he washed. In other words, he is now acting by faith. Jesus initiates, but this man is acting by faith, and he goes to the pool and is healed. Now comes the discussion. We basically, John 9 tells the story of a Jewish man who keeps telling the truth and will not be silenced by intimidation. So the conversation and the controversy begins. Verse 8, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man? It's always odd to me, this poor man. He always seems to be sort of left out of the discussion. You know, the disciples and Jesus have this conversation about this man, and he's like, hey, I'm right here. I'm right here. Exhibit A, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? I'm right here. And now the neighbors asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? And some say, yeah, that's the same man. All the while the man's kind of like, I'm here, you know. Others said, no, he just looks like him. But now he finally speaks up and he says, I am him. I am the man that has been blind all of my life. And they said, how then? Yeah, it was blindness that was the problem. He was not a mute. How then were your eyes opened? So they interrogate him, sort of. He said, the man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. Well, where is this man? They asked. He said, I don't know. Now, we're going to just stop there because the controversy gets a little bit more intense when the Pharisees show up. The neighbors, people who knew and walked past this guy, aren't sure that this is the guy. They're divided. They're divided over whether this is the guy or not. The Pharisees are going to come and we're going to see kind of the division of the neighbors. You're going to see basically that's illustrative of the division of humanity. There's basically two categories: those who see and those who don't. Those who remain in darkness and those who come to the light. Those who believe in Jesus and those who don't believe in Jesus. And it's not a matter of evidence. The Pharisees, the neighbors, the parents, the man himself, the disciples, they all have the same evidence. But what will you do with the evidence? Will this evidence be result in light and in sight and in life? Or will you ignore all of the truth that's staring you in the face and remain in darkness and in guilt and death? So that's all we've got time for today. God bless. And I'm happy to perhaps let the cat out of the bag that maybe before too long we'll be meeting together for Bible study and prayer meetings on Wednesday night. With our masks and socially distanced, of course, but meeting face to face nonetheless. God bless.